Based off the 2015 video game that's hugely popular, and surely it was only a matter of time before it was adapted for the big screen. I mean, after all, in recent years, video game adaptations have been doing very well in the box office. And not just the big screen, I mean, currently, one of the biggest shows out is Last of Us, another video game adaptation. But it's no secret that that's a new thing. Historically, video game adaptations have almost always output abysmal numbers in the box office, never left a lasting impression, and were notorious for leaving a bad taste in fans' mouths. Helming this project is David F. Sandberg, who I'm not really a big fan of his work. He directed the Shazam films, Lights Out, which was really cool conceptually, but I was left wanting by the end, and of course Annabelle Creation, which, fair play to him, was probably the second best of those movies, but that isn't saying a lot, and certainly not as great as Annabelle Comes Home, which is easily the best of the bunch. But right from its inception, the film has a messy production quality, scrapping actors who were already casted for roles, including Rami Malek, and the mid-2000s darling Hayden Panettiere herself, who I honestly think would have really elevated the quality of the film. But they did it mainly because they wanted to create an original premise for the film that's independent from the original story. Personally, I've always felt that adaptations of any content doesn't have to be beat for beat the same narrative as the original content that it derives from. I think it's perfectly fine if you change the story and make it your own, but those changes have to service the story in a way that makes sense and obviously makes it interesting and entertaining. They didn't want to keep the original characters and cast that were extremely faithful to the game? That's perfectly fine, but make it worth altering and manipulating the plot to service the new adaptation. But this was a case where it felt unnecessary to deviate from the original source because it didn't really bring anything new to the table. The premise of the movie is that the main character, Clover, knows her sister went missing a year ago and she wants to find her. So she, along with her friends, go to the valley where her sister was last seen to try and find out what happened to her and realize that they are now trapped there, and to survive they need to make it until dawn. The best and most noteworthy aspects of this film was easily the makeup effects on the gore and the monsters themselves in general. It really did feel like an R-rated film when things weren't happening off screen. You get some pretty solid eye candy in terms of people getting sliced in half, explosions, and a variety of different kills that were all creative and unique. And to a certain extent, the film does show reverence for different subgenres in horror. You got sequences for slashers, possessions, creatures, and found footage. Easily my favorite sequence was the found footage montage through videos on a phone. All of them were unique clips and had different things going on. And this sequence involved my favorite creature of the movie, which was the floating mask in a black suit. I thought it was brilliant how it kinda just unnaturally was floating around by a doorway, and then all of a sudden it just charges at you while also becoming more elongated and tall. It was really cool. It honestly reminded me of my favorite scare in It Follows, with the tall guy randomly showing up behind everybody. Both were fantastic scares for sure. And even the witch bit was pretty fun. I liked how unnerving she was. In some ways, it's also reminiscent of something like 13 Ghosts, where, to be candid, I don't love that movie, but all the creatures are horror icons and easily memorable. A similar principle applies here, where if there's anything anybody's gonna remember from this film, is the creatures. Unfortunately, those are like the only good takeaways from the film. I honestly think that the worst offense you could give a movie is to say that it's just meh or forgettable, and that's exactly what this movie is. It's certainly not great, and as a whole, it's not terrible either, it's just forgettable. Obviously, when a movie is great, there's many elements that help evoke that emotion, and likewise, when something is terrible or really bad, even out of sheer irony, there's always something you're gonna remember out of that movie. And as much as I'm not a fan of this commonly known categorization of films, at their worst, they serve as good, shut your brain off, or popcorn flick movies. But Until Dawn just honestly felt so lackluster, uninspired in its characters and themes, and it's almost mocking itself because there's literally a line where the movie is kind of like self-aware and realizes that it resembles other movies. The movie has decent scares and good effects, but the performances were just awful. The characters themselves were all so shallow, and they honestly felt like first draft level characters where they just didn't feel real. These characters are the epitome of cliches. They each were purposefully stereotypical, but with how little chemistry they had, and being bogged down by exposition about their traits rather than them as people, I didn't care about them in the slightest. Watch Friday from 2009. These characters are also stereotypical, but the actors sell the roles so much. They have so much more chemistry, and regardless of the fact that you know that most of them are going to die, you feel like you know these characters by the end. None of these characters had strong arcs or interesting motivations. It's brutally void of substance, with a half-hearted attempt of dealing with trauma that honestly had no place in this story. Yes, there were cool monsters and creative sets, but that's all it's got going for it. And many cheap jump scares. We even get a flashback that serves literally no purpose other than to lead into another jump scare. The movie did well in showing reverence for horror in terms of using multiple subgenres, but it also brought the worst of horror with it. Bad decisions all over the place and having the thinnest characterizations possible. The film felt so studio driven with no imagination or personality in its take. One of my personal pet peeves is feeling like I'm being forcibly spoon-fed any nuance or details regarding any unknown information. So that last confrontation in the third act, which by the way was a mess, it was so convoluted and I had no idea how to map out where the characters are until the very end, where they kind of just run into each other and magically find each other. But it's also in the third act where the villain is literally explaining why the monsters were so specific. I was speechless. I couldn't believe the movie would do that, because if nothing else, it takes away the ability for viewers to discuss a major part of the movie. There's nothing to discuss when the movie is telling you exactly what everything means. It entirely dissolves the allure of the mystery, especially in a story that you want to emulate the feeling of interaction, where you would be able to be one of these characters and try and think how to advance in the story using intuition and problem solving skills. But the movie just constantly gives you the answers, so it's just like, what's the point? The monsters literally tell them how to win. It just takes away the engagement value entirely. It's like the movie doesn't trust that you're smart enough to figure things out, to the point that the resolution feels like the most unsatisfying conclusion of recent memory. Because by the time you've reached the third act, oh boy, never did I think that a villainous monologue could lead to the most awkward conversation with a wall, just for plot. And game influence aside, conceptually a story like this would be really cool, because you can have the characters lean into using their wits and their experience to help them advance. But after every reset, it feels like they absorbed no new knowledge from their previous death. Give us a scene where the characters discuss their previous mistakes to build a better plan, other than just close themselves off in a room. But again, these characters just make the stupidest decisions that quickly into the movie you find yourself saying, yeah, go ahead, kill them, they're hopeless. On a game that thrives on the use of the butterfly effect, where every action influences everything else, this movie never found how to implement it into its story without it feeling convenient or weird. I'm sure this won't be the last video game adaptation, since they've been on a hot streak. This one will probably just sink quickly, since we'll move on from it that fast as well. That's it for me. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe, and sincerely yours, Anthony.